Michael, thanks a lot for joining us. So we're following the news about the book, and we definitely read. I've read the article in the New York magazine. There are all these stories about that Trump didn't want to be the president. That Steve Bannon said it was a treason to meet, to be ready to cooperate with the Russians. So how the story is discussed? How serious is the whole story, and what is the most important?
Well, it's a big story here in the United States because Steve Bannon is seen as, you might even say, the gray cardinal of the Trump campaign and the Trump presidency. This was the chief strategist behind the alt-right media surge, which fueled the populist sentiment that swept Trump into power. He was the chief strategist who had actually not only joined the National Security Council, but formed his own shadow National Security Council within the White House to push his own agenda, with appointees such as Sebastian Gorka and so on, who were loyal to this kind of American nationalist trope. So for Bannon and Trump to split, I'm trying to think of an analogy. Certainly there is none that comes to mind in the American context. You know, it would be like Brezhnev and Andropov, I guess, you know, publicly feuding. I mean, who's going to win in that fight, right? It's a huge deal, and what's interesting about this book, while it's true that Michael Wolff has a rather dubious reputation as a reporter, he's known to embellish, if not invent whole cloth anecdotes in his reporting, the stuff that has been attributed to Bannon in this book already has not been refuted by Bannon. In fact, all indications based on what's coming out of sort of the Bannon media apparatus suggest that all the quotes are accurate. So what do we take from this? Okay, Steve Bannon has said that the Mueller investigation into possible collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia's interference in the 2016 election is really about money laundering based on the former investigators who have been appointed by Mueller to lead this investigation. I think he's right. He highlighted Deutsche Bank and their involvement in Jared Kushner's real estate empire, which has been a big topic in the reporting on what the investigators might be looking into. He said Don Jr., not particularly bright, is going to, quote, crack like an egg on national TV based on the things that he's been disclosing and how he's been played, in particular by this strange meeting that took place in Trump Tower in 2016 featuring Nataliya Veselnitskaya, who's a lawyer for the Prevazon, which is an entity that was accused of taking some of the stolen Russian taxpayer money affiliated with the Magnitsky affair and laundering it into the Manhattan real estate market. Also, she was accompanied by Rinat Akhmetshin, a former Soviet intelligence officer who's a big lobbying figure in D.C., and another guy, her Russian translator, who, believe it or not, had worked as a translator for the FBI here in New York. So for Bannon to say this meeting was treasonous and unpatriotic, remember, this is a guy who had security clearance, and the speculation in the press is, well, is Veselnitskaya an emissary of the Russian government, or is she just a lowly lawyer from the Moscow region provinces, you know, doing her own patriotic duty to try and end sanctions? If it's treasonous, that would suggest that she is more akin to a Russian government cutout or functionary than just some freelance, which has always been my understanding of what she is.
So, Michael, if to clarify, of course, the book is full of really nasty details. It's enough to have them in the article, in the some parts which are published. But is it the main story that a lot is attributed to Steve Bannon? So is it giving some kind of more credibility to all the allegations, and what are other allegations which probably matter and which keep the American society puzzled by?
Right. Well, with respect to Bannon, again, you know, this breakage of these two minds, or these two figures, Trump and Bannon, it's a major deal. And the book just came out at 9 a.m. today, so I haven't had a chance to go through it all. The question to my mind is, what quotes were attributed to Bannon while he was still in the White House versus what quotes are attributed to him once he was fired or, quote, resigned. One could argue that he's just, you know, this is all sour grapes and it's his chance to get back at the president who sacked him. But there's another issue here, which is, and this is Wolff's own admission in the press that's been coming out on the, you know, the back of the book, everybody he talked to in the White House does not think Donald Trump is fit mentally or emotionally to be commander-in-chief and president of the United States. Now, that is a constitutional crisis, if ever I heard one, right? And this invokes the specter of the 25th Amendment, whether he would be impeached or just simply, is this a colossal train wreck of an administration where everyone's attention and all of their duties are going into keeping the president from having a complete nervous breakdown or keeping him safe from himself, essentially. That's a huge issue in the United States. I mean, this is something that you're accustomed to seeing in tin pot dictatorships or third world regimes, not in the world's only democratic superpower. So there's that aspect of this. And then finally, I would say, look, the way that Trump has responded to this book, threatening to sue or actually attempting legally to block the publication, this has created an unwitting or unintentional tsunami of publicity for the book and has skyrocketed its sales. And it's going to make even Americans inclined to dismiss this as just a tabloid sensation as something more credible and serious. Why go to all this effort to try and quash the publication of something if it's all just, quote, fake news? So Trump himself is playing into the story that Michael Wolff has written, which is very stupid of him to do.
Can you clarify for our audience, because, yeah, you said that Michael Wolff has a dubious reputation, and really this is the argument of the White House. But really, to what extent? Because he was a journalist for some of the respected media. So it's not just, for a Ukrainian audience, you would never know, like, okay, another journalist, there could be numbers of books. So really, what makes this one significant and different from anything else? Did anybody else had such kind of an excess?
I mean, you have to understand in the New York media context. I mean, Wolff's reputation, his stature is built on sort of, oilily wending his way into corridors of power or high society, posing as a friend, as a crony, as one of them, and then basically stabbing them in the back. I mean, that's what he does, right? He's written profiles of people that are very nasty-minded, portraying them in unflattering lights, which these people have said, look, there is fair criticism and then there is, libel or derogatory or simply fabricated stuff. I was at an event once, just to give you my own personal experience with Michael Wolff, was a debate on the Iraq War. On one side was Christopher Hitchens, on the other side was this deranged New York City disc jockey. Michael Wolff was the moderator of the debate. After Hitchens died, and I was very close to him, Michael Wolff wrote this very nasty and sneering profile of Hitchens, saying that he had turned up drunk to the debate. I was there. I spoke to him before the debate and afterward. I can assure you he wasn't drunk, but this just played into the sort of stereotype that people had built up about Christopher Hitchens. So this is the kind of thing that Michael Wolff does. Now, I caveat that by saying, if it is true that he's got tens of hours of audio tapes, recordings of interviews that he conducted with White House officials, I mean, that would just basically, dismiss any allegation that he made this up or that his reporting is inaccurate. And there's a third point to this too, Nataliya, which I want to mention. And it goes toward the general sanity and core competence of this administration. According to the excerpt of the book that was published in New York Magazine, the way that this book was compiled is Michael Wolff basically showed up to the White House. He had developed a relationship with Steve Bannon, but he was essentially allowed to hang around the White House for months on end without any kind of supervision, without any kind of rules of engagement, as it were, about what's on the record, what's off the record, who he can talk to, who he cannot talk to. And, this just speaks to the kind of lack of communication security that the Trump White House has already been known for. I mean, for instance, that famous meeting with Kislyak and Lavrov in the Oval Office, where Trump just disclosed intelligence that was gathered by America's Israeli ally, possibly burning intelligence sources built up by Israel with respect to ISIS in Syria. So to me, that's the most startling thing about this book, how it was put together. No journalist gets access like this to an administration in real time and then is able to publish a book about that administration almost, a little over a year into its tenure. Usually books like these, I mean, Bob Woodward, for instance, reporting on the Obama and Bush administrations about their prosecution of the war on terror. these are manufactured to some extent. They're finessed because the sources have allowed a respected and trusted journalist into their midst to give him their version of the events. This is nothing like that. This is fly-on-the-wall tabloid material. So that's, to me, what's the most shocking aspect of this whole story.
And as well, there is no surprise that there are a lot of things, there are a lot of nasty talks about Donald Trump, and he's such a character. But what's really new we find out about him? For instance, for me, it was really interesting this story about they didn't expect to win, which is a bit of the, I can't say absolute surprise, but it hadn't been written yet. So what are the things which are really, you know, new, besides knowing that Trump is a bully, he's like that, he's like that?
It's not a surprise to people to find out that he doesn't read books, memos, briefings, that he might be semi-literate, that his mind is not all there. I mean, his public behavior in the last 2 years suggests somebody who is, I don't know, I mean, suffering from some kind of debilitating disorder. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I would agree with conservatives who say that psychiatrists shouldn't be doing, diagnoses, remotely based on TV performances and all that. But this is clearly a man that if you encountered in casual life, you would think something is wrong with him. And that he's not particularly bright, and that he's completely narcissistic because he refers to himself all the time. He cannot stop himself from referring to himself and his perceived or real triumphs in life and in business. But all of that to one side, yeah, the fact that he might not have wanted to win the presidency but was using the campaign as a vehicle for his own empire building. He said that he wanted to create, or it's reported in the book that he wanted to create a media empire akin to what Roger Ailes and Rupert Murdoch did with Fox News, and that he would be the next generation of right-wing, the right-wing punditocracy. That to me is plausible. I thought when he got involved in the campaign in the primary season, this wasn't a serious guy. He obviously hadn't organized a competent and coherent campaign infrastructure. He was doing it as a vanity project. And if you know Donald Trump, and having lived in New York my entire life, from the 80s until now, and seen him on the front page of the New York Post, all the time, and all of his big publicity stunts, this is just par for the course. This is what he does. And all of the media critiques about all the free publicity he was given, just because every time he opened his mouth, he said something shocking or sensationalistic, it became, the top story in the cable news channels. Yeah, I thought this was a way for him to make more money. Essentially, he didn't care about winning the office, and so this disclosure in the book is not surprising to me. Now, what I find interesting, and where my head is now kind of going in this, is he won, obviously, shocked himself, appalled his own people who didn't want to win, including his wife, Melania, who assured him he wasn't going to win, according to the book. Where does he go from here? I mean, his first year has been almost an unmitigated catastrophe. They passed a tax bill, but everything else, bar the economy, which is okay, and the stock market, which is okay, largely built on the perception of what he's going to do in terms of deregulation and all that, everything else has been a train wreck. The Russia probe, accusations of obstruction of justice, the sacking of, I've lost track of how many White House officials, and now this book, which his own people, his own trusted advisors, his own consigliere, is bad-mouthing him and saying that this guy is a chump and a clown and shouldn't be in office. At what point does he say, look, if I thought I could make a fortune just running for president, imagine how much money I can make as an ex-president. So in other words, if Donald Trump were to resign or decide I've had enough and declare victory in his own inimitable way, I mean, a media empire akin to Fox News is only the tip of the iceberg for him at this point. Ex-presidents, almost by definition, are celebrities. They are capable of raking in millions and millions and millions of dollars, even without having had any kind of industrial or entrepreneurial background in their resume. And of course, Donald Trump still has enormous assets all over the world. At what point does he say, I just want to have fun again? I don't want to live my life subject to this kind of scrutiny. He's obviously driven mad by the press that he's getting, because it's not the kind of press that he can control and manipulate the way he was able to do for decades in New York as an industrialist. Maybe he wants to go back to the good old days. I don't know. That's the question that has now been raised in my mind based on what I've seen in these book excerpts.
Yeah, before that, we definitely should wait, because he's still an acting president of the United States, and there is a lot which depends on his decisions. before he becomes ex-president.
Right. And, you know, I mean, if he resigned, you know, that wouldn't be the end of the story. It would be a resignation, you know, enveloped in ignominy, because people would say he's doing this to avoid prosecution or whatever. But eventually that, you know, I mean, when Obama left office, the incoming Trump was such a juggernaut that people forgot about Obama. If Trump left office and resigned, there would be this sort of Nixon moment, but that too would subside, and then everyone would be talking about President Pence and his administration. So I don't know. A lot of people who have known and dealt with Trump over the years, and it's particularly in business, have told me his ego is simply too big. He'll never give up the job. You know, forget about it. He'll run again. He'll want to go all 8 years. But truth be told, you know, he's not getting out of this what he thought or what he wanted. And in fact, he might not have wanted anything, because he didn't want the job in the first place, if Michael Wolff is to be believed. So at what point does he say, you know what, I'm going to declare victory. I've led this movement, this sweeping nationalist populist movement, you know, into the highest levers of American power. I'll just hand the keys over to my deputy. I mean, in a way, sort of castling, like Putin, Medvedev, right? And then let Pence just fulfill the Trump legacy. I think that's plausible at this point. I really do.
Hey, Michael, thanks a lot. We will follow the story and definitely we'll read the book to know more details, though now we have a better understanding of what kind of the book it is. Thank you.